when you're not able to feel like perform in the way that you expect, it causes that shame, internal shame about yourself of like, something's wrong with me. And when something's wrong with me, it's better to hide it because you don't want to share it with other people.
Welcome to the Erasing Shame podcast. We are erasing shame about mental health by having honest talk for healthy living. We are so glad you can join us.
Welcome to this episode of Erasing Shame. This is our special summer series about mental health. And I'm your host, Jeremiah Chuang. Today, we're going to be talking about sex and sexual shame with marriage and family therapist associate, Hanna. Could you tell us your name and what you do in regards to mental health?
Sure. My name is Hanna. I am an AMFT, meaning that I'm an associate marriage and family therapist. I'm not licensed yet, and so I'm working towards my licensure, trying to gain my hours. I'm a therapist here at Asian American Christian Counseling Services. And yeah, that's pretty much what I do. I'm currently married. Been married for 3 years, and I'm expecting a child in October.
That's wonderful.
Yeah.
What's some of your background with family or community or ethnicity?
Yeah, so I'm a Korean American. I was born in Korea, but I was raised pretty much my entire life in the States. I actually come from Seattle, Washington. That's where I mainly grew up, and I moved here to Los Angeles about 3 years ago, pretty much pursuing marriage and family therapy. Yeah, I went to Fuller Seminary, got my master's there, graduated last year, and now I'm just doing therapy and trying to gain my hours. Yeah.
Thank you. Could you, speaking about that, could you tell us about your passion for mental health and what you want to do with in the future? Are there any specific topic focuses or any issues that you've dealt with personally?
Yeah, so the reason why I ended up coming to mental health is kind of an interesting story. In Seattle, where I grew up, I was very involved in ministry. And so there I actually thought that I was going to pursue to become like a pastor or a minister. And I worked a lot within the children's ministry, the youth ministry, and the college ministries, a lot of youth and young adults. And there I just realized my heart and passion for families. I think kind of where like we find healthy children, healthy youth, right? Healthy upbringing is through healthy families. And so that's where my heart started kind of stirring for just healthy relationships. And it was kind of, I think, a shock to me to find that in the church there were so many broken relationships, a lot of, divorce, just abuse, trauma, even suicide that would occur. And there wasn't a lot that I think the church was educated to do something about it. And that's actually how, when I went to Fuller, I actually started with an MDiv thinking, okay, this is what I'm going to pursue. And then I heard about the MFT degree. And I thought this is so cool because it's so much more practical, where you can actually work with the families directly or work with people directly with issues that they come with, probably at church too, but more in kind of an educated and like a better understanding of it, kind of like that psychology background versus just from a spiritual standpoint, although both is important, which I think that's what being a Christian counselor kind of brings those two things together. So yeah, that's kind of how I ended up where I am.
Very cool. Yeah. What were some of the key insights that helped you really empathize with people you ministered, or what were some of those turning points in your story?
Turning points and insights. Well, definitely from my own background and history in my own family. I have a younger brother, and he's like 5-6 years younger than me, and we both grew up with both my parents in Seattle, my mom and my dad. And, I think we come from a very traditional Korean conservative Presbyterian church background. My mom wasn't necessarily Christian, when we first started going to church, but it was the place to go because, that's where the only place you find community, like the Asian Korean community. And my mom was okay with that because she can only speak Korean. And so that's kind of where we grew up, and that's kind of what formed a lot of my family's kind of morals, kind of like, ethics, and just how we kind of understand what's, like, I guess what you say, like, what's normal, like what's good or what's right and what's wrong, in a sense. But with that, something that I think I would always come across is this idea of shame. I mean, this whole series is all about shame, which I think is really interesting, but that's something that I think I would always come across. Like, shame was the kind of the driving thing that caused people to try to do the right thing, right? In a lot of conservative, like, Presbyterian backgrounds, especially in the Korean community, that's literally what it's all about, like that communal shame, like that feelings of, like, if I do this, then that's wrong, then my family would be put in shame, and then you won't be able to be showing your face in, like, the community and whatnot. And because of that, like, I grew up a lot with this idea of, like, you need to put on a right face. You need to present yourself in a certain way, especially even more so as a girl. Like, I was the firstborn girl in my family, and which tends to be a pretty big deal, because then you have to kind of act like a proper, girl, and and I was a Christian leader when I was growing up there too. So even that sense, like, I had to be proper in that way and kind of show that, like, I come from a good Korean, conservative family, Christian family. So there wasn't a lot of, like, even if we were having internal struggles or things that we were dealing with, it wasn't something that we could upfront share it, especially within our community, like our church community, which definitely caused a lot of problems, and even for me, a lot of internal struggles. And that's kind of why I think mental health is such an important thing, and erasing that shame from these communities, and understanding that, we all have issues. We all can get help, and that's okay. And we can talk about it is kind of why, like, part of that, I think the insight, kind of the turning point for me, kind of occurred, I think, more gradually, more than, like, just a one point in my life where I'm like, this is it. Like, I don't need to be, like, put the shame on anymore, because it's still ingrained in us, right? Like, as an Asian American, if you grew up in that kind of upbringing, it's hard to erase that completely. It's something that you're constantly having to struggle with, and trying to tell yourself that it's okay to normalize it, and to say that, I don't need to be, like, shameful about it. God took away that shame, and through Christ and whatnot. And so it is more of a gradual thing, more than, like, a thing that happened in that one moment and changed my life forever kind of thing. Yeah. Yeah.
What were some, thanks for sharing that.
Yeah.
What were some misunderstandings? Was it this, like, general impression that you had to uphold your own reputation and your family's reputation as the eldest daughter? Was that sort of a barrier that prevented you from sharing about some of the things you struggled with? Or did you try to bring it up, and was it
it's sorry, I'm gonna move around a little bit, but so one thing that comes to mind a lot when I was growing up and trying to find this understanding is actually this topic of sex, especially as an Asian American female. Like, it's so hard to talk about, because, like, well, for one, to show that you have desires for sex is it's almost like put as a shameful thing, right? I mean, as a male is one thing too, but, we almost have in this culture an understanding that males are sexual beings, and all of a sudden women aren't, like, which doesn't make sense, like, because women are just as sexual as males. And I grew up with this understanding that, like, I'm not allowed to be that way, right? I'm not allowed to be sexual. And I remember, especially throughout college, is when that really occurred to me a lot of, like, I have these desires. I have this almost want to be loved and be intimate with someone, but I'm almost not allowed to express it. And even if I did, there was kind of like, right, like almost like a, whoa, you're talking too much. Like, that's too open. That's too much. Which in a sense, like, took that as kind of like, okay, I'm not allowed to talk about these things. And so I have to hide it. Like, I have to just carry it and hold on to it, which took a lot of impact later on, even by the time I got married. We have this understanding, like, especially in the church context, where sex is for marriage, right? So before marriage, all you have to do is abstain. Like, we have to abstain from sex. And that's just what you can't do. You can't talk about it, like anything revolving around it, just don't do it. Especially from like that conservative background. And it's a really tough thing, because in the culture that we live in, especially today, that's not really the reality. Like, abstaining is one option, but a lot of times, like, that's not what actually happens. We come across like a lot more, sure, I guess you can call it acceptance and just having sex before marriage. But when we bring that into like the church context, it's still so much shame that's put into it. If people were to share that they had sex before marriage, it's such a like, whoa, like, you did something wrong. Like, that's really bad. That's sinful of you. And I mean, yeah, that's definitely maybe a sin that maybe people do, but like, it's no different than all the other sins that I feel like maybe we come across and we have to deal with as well. But something that I struggled with specifically, because of that misunderstanding of not being able to talk about sex, really impacted how I view myself as a sexual person, right? And so when I go into marriage, we're like, yes, sex is a great thing, like, have sex, all that, all that you want. And all of a sudden, you're not able to. Like, all of a sudden, there's these things called sexual dysfunctions that occur in a lot of marriages, where it's like you just don't know what to do with, because all of a sudden you're allowed to have sex, and then now it doesn't work, right? It's not what you expected. Sex is so romanticized in our culture of, oh, this is a great thing, and it's supposed to look like in this way, and like, especially in media and whatnot. But the reality is not like that. It's very like, it's hard work. You have to put effort and a lot of work and thought into it. And I think a lot of women, we struggle to really talk about those things, especially as Asian women, because we don't even know where to start. And so I think with that is something that I personally definitely have struggled with, but I see a lot of other women struggling with it too, which, again, it goes back to like my heart for the church and my heart for families, my heart for marriages. This is such a huge thing that I think the church should be talking about, and, opening up those conversations for, that I think we really lack. Yeah.
Have you been able to have more conversations where you can feel less isolated with the sort of shame you've internalized about sex?
Yeah. I honestly, the conversation started once I started going to school. Once I started going to my MFT program, and I had this class specifically on sexuality and what that's supposed to look like, and we talked specifically on sexual dysfunctions. And this is something that I was struggling with for a while, but like, until that class, and I, like, in that moment where I was surrounded by my cohort members that also was struggling with a lot of similar things, and we were so open and willing to just share with each other about it, that, I mean, it made me feel so much more accepted. Like, I felt so much more normal, of like, oh, I'm really not the only one. Like, I don't have to be the only one. I don't have to be the one to just hide this constantly and try to deal with on my own. And during that time, I was also receiving therapy. I mean, through the program, they encourage you to go through therapy, and I did it just to try it out, honestly. But it was so great because I stuck with it for pretty much the entire 2 years, because I realized all these things that were coming out with it, along with, you know, the shame that I had with sex, or just a lot of my background history of just trauma that I've received, or trauma that I've had, that was able to kind of unravel and kind of unpack a little bit during therapy, that allowed me to really, you know, I think, have those conversations, be more open about it, and feel like this isn't something that I need to put shame around. Yeah.
Yeah. I really see how the shame has colored your background, and even it started to go away as you started to talk about it in college. But you also mentioned trauma. Could you say more about that?
Well, so it's interesting because, like, especially in sexual trauma, we always think of it as, like, sexual abuse, right? In a lot of ways. And, like, forced into sex and whatnot. And I don't really feel like that was my experience per se, but I say trauma because of my lack of understanding of sex during that time, and the lack of conversations that they were. And when I was put into that situation, it was very like, it was so exposing. Like, it felt like trauma because there were so many things that were unexpected. And during that process, yeah, like, I was really hurt by it. Like, I was, in a lot of ways, devalued. And yeah, sure, there was some kind of abuse and just, just struggles that surrounded kind of what happened during that time, with past relationships. But and I think the only best way to say it is that it was trauma that impacted my understanding of sex. I think about more specifically about, like, as a woman, like, you have this, like, understanding that, like, when you're in a romantic relationship with someone, that, especially when it comes around sex, at least from my understanding, was that you had to please the other. Like, you had to please the man. Which is a very distorted way of thinking, but for some reason I had this understanding that if I wanted to be loved, right, if I wanted to be accepted by this person that can give me love and affection and intimacy, then I have to kind of give into all these person's needs, whether I like it or not. Which is really sad, but at the same time, I think this is a lot of what women think, a lot of what women feel in a lot of romantic relationships. Whether they like it or not, it's kind of like we just have to feed into their need. Like, as if it's like men are these, like, I don't know, like, sexual, like, you know, like, unstopped, you know, like, I don't even know what, like, animals, I guess. Like, it just doesn't make sense. But I think even for me as a woman, like, that, with that lack of conversations and understanding of sex and what my value is as a person, and how I'm able to also gain the pleasures of what God has gifted in sex, right? To really deform my understanding of sex, and then which goes into into marriage, of when sex is allowed, all of a sudden it just doesn't seem to be what you expected. Yeah, if that makes sense. I feel like I'm talking kind of everywhere, but yeah.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah.
Was your counselor able to help you with that as you're going through therapy? Or
yeah.
What some of the things that he or she did to help you unpack?
Well, so I know, like, when we think about therapists, they have obviously, like, they specialize in certain areas. There's definitely sex therapists, and I even looked those up, but they're expensive. Like, if you have a couple $100 that are just laying around that you can use per session, I mean, yeah, sure, go for it. But a lot of people can't really afford that, and I couldn't either. So just through my marriage and family therapist, just to open up conversation and just to share, like, this is something I'm struggling with, was so eye-opening to me. Like, it was one of the few places where I was able to just talk freely about how I felt and, like, the scars that I carried and how it impacts me today, and just feeling more than anything like shame, like just talking about that shame and feeling so devalued and like so much of this unworthiness that kind of deterred away from my current relationships at that time. And one thing that my therapist, and even during my education and through that class, that really helped me was that a lot of times with like sexual issues or sex issues, it's really, there's a lot of layers. It's not just one thing. Like a lot of misunderstandings. I remember I would share with some friends about like, I'm having this problem, I don't know what to do. And it's not a simple thing of like, oh, maybe you need to change positions, or, you know, like maybe you need to like, you know, use different things and tools so that it would help you. But it wasn't just that. It was so much deeper than that. And ultimately it does come down to this shame, like feeling like when something, especially with sexual dysfunctions, like when you're not able to like feel like perform in the way that you expect, it causes that shame, internal shame about yourself of like, something's wrong with me. And when something's wrong with me, it's better to hide it because you don't want to share it with other people, especially in the cultural context that I come from. And then when that occurs, it goes more into the repeated pain that you know, go through over and over again, even throughout marriage. And that's kind of where it became that repetitive cycle. And it wasn't until my therapist really had to like one by one like kind of unravel those small layers at a time to say like, hey, it's not just one thing, you know, there's these internalized things that I've kept for a long time that I was able to share and open up about, that allowed me to really find more of the healing and recovery path from it. Yeah.
Wow. What's something particular that you could offer to Asian Americans about how to unpack the different layers of sex and the shame that's related to it? Because you were just saying that it's so super connected. It's not just about the what happens in the bedroom.
Right.
It's about all these layers of past experiences and past perceptions.
Yeah.
How could you help our audience?
Yeah.
Those?
Yeah, I think I was just mentioning before too, like, I really just feel like it starts with having open conversations. Just to sit with someone, whether it's a friend, a family member, or someone that you trust, or a therapist, which therapists are awesome, to just sit with them and be completely open, like, and honest, and share that, hey, this is something I'm struggling with, and I don't know what to do. Like, I don't know where to start. I don't know where to be in all of it. Like, just to have an open conversation, just to say that, hey, this is what I'm struggling with. This is where I'm at. I feel it can do so much. Not only to the person that's sharing it, because, yes, it's a very vulnerable place, and it's a place where you can feel like people are going to judge you. People are going to, you know, look at you differently or whatever may happen. But once you're able to share something like that, there's something within you that like opens up. And when someone that does open up share, the other receiving end, that the other end that is receiving it is going through something similar to it, it starts like a ripple effect, right? Like, you start sharing about it, then another person will receive it and be like, man, I'm going through that same thing, and start sharing to somebody else about it. You can create essentially like a culture, right? A community that says like, you know what, you're right. Like, we shouldn't be shameful about this. This is something that happens. And yes, it sucks, but there's a lot of layers that are coming from it. And a lot of times in the end, it comes from this place of feeling not good enough, feeling unworthy, feeling devalued, which, like, one thing that I gained through the Christian church community is the fact that I'm not those things, right? God himself says that I'm not, and I'm like more valued than ever, that I am so worthy to the point that Christ died for me on the cross. Like, there's so much in that, but can we bring those two things together, right? Even in the midst of having problems or misunderstandings or trauma with sex, like, can you still feel like God still values you in those places? And I think that starts by having those conversations. Yeah, just sharing.
Thank you very much.
Yeah.
You're very honest with yourself, and I can see how that process over the years of trying to unpack all this through therapy and through relationships and through your church has really helped us create honest talk for healthy living. Yeah, no, for sure. I'm glad I could be a part of it. Appreciate the time for me to share. Yeah. Thanks, Hannah. That was a really open and vulnerable, emotional conversation. Thank you for sharing about sexual shame and your journey through it. And this concludes our episode from Erasing Shame series about mental health. Please be sure to follow us on Facebook, YouTube, and iTunes. And we also have a website at erasingshame.com.
Thank you for joining us for this episode of Erasing Shame about mental health. Visit our website for all of our episodes at erasingshame.com. Please subscribe on iTunes or YouTube and like us on Facebook.